Imagine, you hear the frantic hum of motorcades cutting through the Potomac fog, the rhythmic screech of the metro tunneling beneath the National Mall, and the relentless, frantic pace of thousands of tourists hitting the pavement of 10th Street. This is Washington, D.C., the political nerve center of the world, a marble-clad machine of power that never sleeps. But today, in the year 2026, we are turning back the dial. We are peeling back the layers of asphalt, scraping away the concrete, and erasing the monuments until only the raw, jagged edges of the swampy riverbank remain. Welcome to the final act of the American Civil War. The year is 1865. The sounds of the city aren't sirens and engines, but the rhythmic thud of a horse's gallop through deep mud, the rustle of wool uniforms in the cold April wind, and the heavy metallic clank of construction crews finishing the iron dome of the Capitol. At the corner of 10th and E, a massive brick structure is rising, defined by its arched windows and the flickering glow of gas lamps. This is Ford's Theater, the temple of distraction and embryo. It is the place where the DNA of tragedy, sacrifice, and cold, hard political fallout first combined to redefine the American soul. Imagine yourself standing in the lobby. This wasn't a majestic sanctuary of peace. It was a gritty, multi-purpose complex that served as a social theater, a gossip hub, and a target for a desperate conspiracy. Here, President Abraham Lincoln, the man with the deep gravel-etched face and the weary eyes of a giant, enters to the sound of "Hail to the Chief." Lincoln wasn't a polished aristocrat. He was the CEO of a fractured firm fighting a hostile takeover from within. The Union at this moment was essentially a corporate startup being rebuilt from the wreckage of a bloody 4-year merger. Inside the theater, you see a calculated chaos. Ushers frantically seating the crowd while arguments erupt in a dozen different political dialects, from the radical fire of the abolitionists to the sharp business-like caution of the war-weary citizens. Leaving the festive atmosphere of the lobby, you walk toward the presidential box, the artery that leads to the heart of the night's tragedy. Why this box? Because it was a billboard for a nation's return to normalcy. The box is draped in the Treasury flag, shimmering in the gaslight like a pearl of the Union's resilience. This is the district of the elite, the leaders of the new world. The box features heavy velvet curtains and a rocking chair that reaches for the status of a relic. For a leader like Lincoln, a seat at the theater wasn't just a rest, it was a signal of victory. Inside, you'd find a man carrying the weight of meticulous ledgers of casualty lists. In Washington, status wasn't measured by noble titles, but by your global reach in the effort to keep a divided house standing. But the real soul of the conspiracy lived in the boarding houses. By the spring of 1865, taverns and back rooms were everywhere, community centers for the desperate and newsrooms for the radical all in one. Imagine stepping into a side room at sunset. The air is thick with the smell of candle wax and smoke from long clay pipes. A man like John Wilkes Booth is telling tales of a lost cause while his managers of chaos argue over the timing of a final strike. This was the origin of practical fanaticism. They made a hard-eyed practical calculus. The death of a man mattered less than the destruction of the contract he had spent 4 years signing. This is the high-stakes risk that modern security wears as a badge of honor today. The city was a proto-industrial symphony of makers and mourners. Steam engines brought home the veterans, while the screech of sawmills and the thump of construction defined the daily hustle. They built infrastructure, telegraph lines, bridges, and a rail system that connected the coast to the heartland. Washington, D.C. was once a working Venice of mud and ambition, less romance than logistics and all the more revolutionary for it. However, this victory had shadows. At the bottom were 4 million people emerging from a system of total coercion, holding a new and fragile legal status called freedom. They could marry and own land, but their lives remained bound to a landscape of deep-seated tension. The relationship with the South was one of constant pressure as the nation tried to find its footing on ancestral land. This is why they built the Ring of Forts, a palisade of iron and earth stretching from river to river, the final boundary of a union that had survived its own collapse. In 1865, the threat came not from the battlefield, but from the shadows of a playhouse. A single shot appeared in the night, the flash of a derringer aimed directly at the presidential box. Lincoln's supporters wanted peace, but the conspirators calculated the cost of chaos and pressured the timeline of history. The war was eventually won to allow the city to grow, and the path of the funeral train became the emotional center of the world. 161 years later, the name of the era has changed, but the spirit remains eternal. The United States is the child of a crisis, raised on sacrifice and diversity. It solved the puzzle we still struggle with, how a house divided can learn to stand in a crowded space. The answer wasn't just a grand speech, but a practical deal. If we can uphold the contract of liberty together, we can live together. Rome was built on the sword, but Lincoln's republic was built on a contract of blood.